"You wouldn't survive a day without me, Claire." That's what he said. Then he called me lucky, while I stared at a spa receipt for 2, dated Valentine's Day. But it wasn't just cheating. He'd put the lake house in my name, so he could hide it from the IRS and show it off to her. Then he smiled at me over dinner and asked if I wanted to renew our vows. I said yes. Because Brian may have underestimated my insecurities, but he never read the fine print. I ran his business. I kept every password. And by the time that vow renewal toast went viral, my email had already hit send. Now ask yourself, if your husband forged your signature to impress his mistress, would you let him keep the house? I never planned on becoming invisible. That's just what happens, I guess, when you spend 20 years making someone else's life run smooth as silk. You disappear into the routine of it all, the scheduling, the organizing, the quiet crisis management that keeps the wheels turning while your husband builds his empire. You want to know what marriage looked like from where I sat? Picture this. Me at our kitchen counter this morning, same as any morning, with my coffee going cold beside my laptop. The steam had long since stopped rising, but I kept my hands wrapped around the mug anyway. Maybe for comfort, maybe out of habit. I'd already folded the towels from the dryer, stacked them in perfect thirds the way Brian likes. Military corners, he always said, though he never served a day in uniform. Our wedding photo hung in the hallway, one of those oversized prints that's supposed to make a statement. The funny thing is, it looked almost too bright against the shadowy wall, like someone had cranked up the saturation on just that one moment while the rest of life stayed dim. 20 years ago, I actually believed that smile Brian wore, the one that said I was the center of his world. These days, his smiles came with strings attached. "You're lucky, Claire," he'd say, whenever I tried bringing up the distance between us. "Most men wouldn't put up with your insecurities." He had a way of turning that word into a weapon, making it sound like my need for basic consideration was some kind of character flaw. Want to know what really makes my stomach turn? I used to thank him for those backhanded compliments. Can you believe that? I'd actually feel grateful when he'd point out how lost I'd be without him. Meanwhile, I was the one keeping his entire business life from falling apart. The empire, that's what Brian called it, started as a small consulting firm, grew into something that ate up every minute of his time and most of his attention. But who do you think handled the books, filed the quarterly reports, organized the client meetings, and kept track of every receipt, password, and backup? That would be me, the invisible wife. I developed systems for everything, color-coded folders for tax documents, spreadsheets for expense tracking, encrypted files with login credentials. Not because Brian asked me to, he was always too busy for details, but because I needed something solid to trust. Systems don't lie. Systems don't gaslight you into thinking you're paranoid for asking questions. You know what's funny about habits? Sometimes they save you when you least expect it. Like how I automatically scanned and filed every receipt that crossed our threshold, or how I kept meticulous records of every password change and bank transfer. Not because I was planning anything, I just believed in being thorough. Sitting there this morning, watching my coffee turn to ice, I could feel something different in the air. The kitchen felt too quiet, like the space itself was holding its breath. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. The ticking of the wall clock felt deliberate, each second dropping like a stone into still water. Brian had already left for work, of course. Early meetings, he'd said, not even bothering to kiss me goodbye. His coffee cup sat in the sink. He never could remember to rinse it, and his newspaper lay scattered across the counter, business section on top. Just another normal morning in the life of the perfect wife, except nothing felt normal anymore. Maybe it was the way the morning light cut across the granite countertop, creating sharp shadows that seemed to split everything in two. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I wasn't quite ready to name. I stood up to rinse my mug, moving through the motions of my daily routine. The dishwasher needed emptying. The grocery list needed updating. Brian's dry cleaning needed picking up. All these little tasks that kept his world turning, while mine stayed frozen in place. But here's the thing about being invisible. No one thinks to watch what you're doing. No one questions why you keep such careful records or maintain such organized files. No one realizes that sometimes the person who knows all the secrets is the one they should fear the most. I should have known something was wrong that morning. You get a feeling sometimes, don't you? Like the air's too heavy or the silence has teeth. I was going through my usual routine, making beds, sorting laundry, all those invisible tasks that keep a house from falling into chaos. 20 years of marriage had turned me into a well-oiled machine of domestic efficiency. Brian's golf bag was slumped by the door like a drunk friend who'd overstayed their welcome. I probably wouldn't have given it a second glance if it hadn't been for that cologne, just a whisper of something that didn't belong in our home. Not his usual scent, the one I'd been buying him every Christmas since 2005. "Has anyone seen my phone charger?" I called out to an empty house, my voice bouncing off walls lined with family photos. Those pictures showed us smiling, always smiling. Funny how a camera can lie without trying. I knelt down beside the golf bag, telling myself I was just being thorough in my search. The side pocket yielded nothing but teas and scorecards, but when I slipped my hand into the main compartment's lining, my fingers brushed against paper. A receipt, folded twice and tucked away like a guilty secret. My coffee sat cooling on the counter as I smoothed out the creases. The text was crisp, matter of fact. Hotel spa package for 2. The date hit me like a slap. February 14th, Valentine's Day. The day Brian had told me he was stuck in meetings until late, too busy even for our traditional dinner out. The coffee turned to acid in my mouth as I memorized every detail. The room number, the amount, the timestamp. Each number branded itself into my brain like a hot iron marking cattle. "You're lucky I'm with you." How many times had Brian said those words? They used to sound like awkward attempts at affection, the kind of clumsy joke you forgive because marriage means accepting imperfection. Now those same words hissed with new meaning, coiling around my throat like a threat. He wasn't trying to be funny. He was reminding me of my place. My hands moved on autopilot, refolding the receipt along its original creases. I tucked it back exactly, where I'd found it, careful not to leave new wrinkles that might tell tales. Years of handling Brian's business documents had taught me the value of precision. As I wiped away any trace of my fingerprints from the golf bag's surface, I could hear his footsteps approaching the kitchen. I straightened up and forced my face into its familiar mask. The capable wife, the reliable partner, the woman who never questions too deeply. My smile felt like it might crack my cheeks, but I'd had plenty of practice holding it steady. Confronting him now would be worse than useless. Brian was a master of turning questions back on the questioner, of making me doubt my own eyes. Without proof, real proof, documented and undeniable, he'd twist this into another story about my insecurities, my neediness, my luck in having him to stabilize my emotional chaos. No, this wasn't the moment for confrontation. This was the moment for clarity. I'd watch every move he made, track every lie he told, document every betrayal, even if each discovery felt like swallowing broken glass. The truth would hurt, but I needed to know how deep this went. I returned to the office that afternoon, my hands steady, even though my insides felt like crumpled paper. You know that feeling when your world tilts sideways, but you have to keep walking like everything's level? That was me, logging into my computer, nodding at coworkers, playing the part I'd mastered over 20 years. Brian's calendar was open on my screen, a habit he'd never questioned since I'd always managed his schedule. There it was. K, project review, 2 p.m. Kendra. The consultant I'd spent 3 weeks training myself, showing her our filing systems, explaining our workflow processes. Each memory of her eager note-taking now felt like a small betrayal. "Just checking the Anderson meeting details," I said, when Sarah from accounting passed by. My voice sounded normal. Good. I'd learned from Brian that confidence sells any story. The expense reports were right there in our system. I didn't even need to dig. Brian had grown careless, probably assuming I'd never look closely at the business accounts. The Valentine's Day spa charges jumped out first, $850 for client entertainment. Then, more entries bloomed like ugly flowers. Dinner at Laurent's, $425, weekend conference hotel stays, even a jewelry store receipt labeled office supplies. Each discovery was another crack in the foundation of our marriage. Through the glass wall of my office, I caught their reflection in the hallway. Brian and Kendra heading to the conference room. He touched her elbow lightly, the kind of casual contact that speaks volumes. She laughed at something he said, her head tilted back just so. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, like at high altitude where you have to remind yourself to breathe. My fingers moved automatically, taking screenshots, saving files. I named the folder Q1 Utility Statements, boring enough to be invisible. 20 years of managing Brian's digital life had taught me how to hide things in plain sight. The drive home felt endless. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, but I couldn't relax them. Every red light was a small eternity where I had to sit with what I knew. Our house looked different now, like a movie set where actors play at being happy. Even the porch light seemed artificial, too bright and purposeful. In the bathroom that evening, I stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back had practiced expressions, calm, reasonable, controlled. "How long?" I whispered, testing the Yaika words. "Too weak." "When did it start?" "Better, but still not right." I needed something that would cut through his usual deflections and excuses. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, that familiar rhythm that used to mean comfort but now felt like a countdown. My heart hammered against my ribs as I switched off the bathroom light. In our bedroom, Brian was already loosening his tie, humming something under his breath. He looked so normal, so unchanged by what he'd done. I waited until he turned around. One question. It had to be perfect. It had to be a key that would unlock the truth, or at least show me who he really was. I took a breath and felt the weight of 20 years of marriage hanging on what came next. "Do you think I'm stupid, Brian?" The humming stopped. His hands froze on his tie, and in the seconds before he spoke, I saw something flicker across his face that told me everything I needed to know about our future. You know what they say about moments that change your life? Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're just 5 words and a loaded silence, stretching out between two people who used to know each other. I stood in our bedroom doorway that night, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. The Valentine's Day receipt felt like it was burning a hole in my memory. You know that moment, when you're about to step off a cliff, but your feet keep moving anyway? "Brian?" I kept my voice small, the way he preferred. "I noticed a charge from the Morton Hotel Spa back in February. The one downtown?" He was sitting on the edge of our bed, loosening his tie with the same methodical movements he'd used for 20 years. The familiarity of it made everything worse somehow. "What about it?" He didn't even look up. It was for 2 people, on Valentine's Day." My fingers twisted the hem of my sleeve. "When you told me you were at that suppliers conference in Phoenix." That's when he smirked. God, I'll never forget that smirk. Like he was almost proud of being caught, like my pain was a punchline he'd been waiting to deliver. "You wouldn't survive a day without me, Claire." He said my name like he was talking to a child. "Don't embarrass yourself by making accusations you can't handle the answers to." The room tilted sideways for a second. You ever have someone punch you in the gut with words instead of fists? "I just thought," I started, but he cut me off. "There you go with your insecurities again." He stood up, towering over me. "This is exactly why I can't tell you things. You turn everything into drama, into problems that don't exist." My stomach knotted so tight I thought I might be sick. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It can become your shield if you let it. "You're right," I heard myself say, the words tasting like copper pennies. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up." He nodded, satisfied with my surrender. "Get some sleep. You're obviously overthinking things again. I waited in bed, counting his breaths until they turned deep and even. The digital clock hit 11:30 when I finally slid out from under the covers. The hardwood was cold under my feet as I crept downstairs to the kitchen table where his business laptop sat. I'd known his passwords for years, had to handle the billing and scheduling he couldn't be bothered with. My fingers moved across the keyboard in the dark, the screen's glow casting shadows on the walls. Each click felt like picking a lock. Bank statements, transfer records, email threads. I backed them all up, one by one, naming each file with military precision, dates, vendors, amounts. 20 years of handling his paperwork meant I knew exactly where the bodies were buried, so to speak. The hotel spa receipt got special treatment. I photographed it 3 times under the kitchen light, making sure every detail was crystal clear. Then I uploaded the images to my private cloud account, buried in a folder he'd never think to look for. Around 4 a.m., the coffee had gone cold. Beside me, for the second time that night, the evidence was piling up in neat digital rows, but something else was growing too. This weight in my chest that threatened to pull me under. You can drown in loneliness, even when you're doing the right thing. Did you know that? I opened my email and started typing, Gloria, then stopped. Gloria from next door, who'd retired from 30 years of forensic accounting. Gloria, who always said her door was open if I needed to talk. Gloria, who'd seen right through Brian's charm at every neighborhood barbecue. My cursor hovered over the send button. Asking for help would make it real, all of it. The betrayal, the lies, the danger of what I was doing. Once I hit send, I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just a bad dream I'd wake up from. The sky was starting to turn gray at the edges when I finally moved my mouse. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't fight alone. The next morning, my fingers trembled so badly I could barely grip my laptop as I walked up Gloria's flower-lined path. You know that feeling when you're about to share a secret that's been eating you alive? That's where I was. Gloria answered her door in a faded apron that smelled like banana bread, and for a split second, I almost lost it right there. But she just gave me that steady look of hers and said, "Kitchen, now." I'd known Gloria since we moved in next door 8 years ago. She'd been our accountant until she retired last spring, the kind who could spot a decimal point out of place from across the room. Her kitchen was exactly what you'd expect. All warm wood and meticulous organization, with a row of copper-bottomed pots hanging above the stove like medals. "Start at the beginning," she said, pulling out a chair. "And don't leave anything out." My hands shook as I opened the laptop, but Gloria's calm was contagious. She listened without a single interruption while I walked her through everything, the receipt, Kendra, the company charges. When I finished, she adjusted her reading glasses and started scanning through the files I'd backed up. "Look here," she said after a few minutes, pointing at the screen. "And here, and here." Her finger traced a pattern through the transfers I hadn't even noticed. He's not just spending company money on her, he's moving it through different accounts first, trying to hide it. "Is that bad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gloria's laugh had no humor in it. "Honey, he's hanging himself with every transfer. This is a clean rope of numbers, and he tied each knot himself." For the first time in days, I felt something like relief loosen in my chest. But then, Gloria sat back and took off her glasses, and my stomach dropped at her expression. "When's the firm's annual audit?" she asked. "End of next month, I think. Why?" 6 weeks. She tapped her calendar. "That's your clock, Claire. Either the audit clears him or everything comes out." The ticking filled the room like a bomb. 6 weeks. The weight of it settled into my bones. "Listen carefully," Gloria leaned forward. "Timing matters more than rage. Here, one wrong move, and Brian will rewrite the whole story. Make you look crazy, jealous, vindictive, whatever works in his favor." I nodded, gripping my coffee mug like an anchor. "So what do I do?" "First rule, and this is going to hurt. You need to still be married when the numbers drop." The mug nearly slipped from my hand. "What? Why?" "Because right now you're his wife. You had access to everything legally. But if you leave, He can claim you stole information, hacked accounts, acted maliciously. He could lock you out completely. The banana bread smell suddenly made me nauseated. The marriage that was killing me was also my only shield. I drove home that afternoon with my head spinning. At dinner, I watched Brian across the table, this man who'd turned our vows into handcuffs. He was telling some story about a client meeting, so pleased with himself, so certain of his luck. "Everything okay?" he asked, catching my stare. "You're quieter than usual." I forced my lips into a smile, the same one I'd been practicing. "Just tired," I said, wondering how long he planned to keep me trapped in his version of lucky. He reached across the table and patted my hand, like you'd comfort a child. "Maybe you should go to bed early. You look stressed." I nodded, not trusting my voice, while the countdown echoed in my head. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of pretending. 6 weeks until either the audit buried the truth or set it free. The days after Gloria's warning blurred together like watercolors. I moved through our house with mechanical grace, playing the role of devoted wife while my mind worked overtime. You know that feeling when you're running 2 different programs at once? That was me. One version smiling and nodding, the other documenting every receipt that crossed my path. I'd slip out each afternoon, telling Brian I was running errands. Instead, I'd end up at Gloria's kitchen table, our laptops glowing side by side while we pieced together Brian's financial jigsaw puzzle. The smell of her ever-present chamomile tea became oddly comforting as we worked. "Look here," Gloria would say, tapping her screen. "He's getting sloppy with the timing. 3 expenses at the same restaurant in 1 week, all coded as client meetings?" Her reading glasses would slide down her nose as she leaned in. "But the amounts are too round, too neat. Real business dinners have odd numbers." I learned to speak differently around Brian during those days. My voice got softer, my questions shorter. I noticed how his jaw would tighten whenever I showed any spark of independence, so I made myself smaller. Invisible, almost. It was like walking on ice. One wrong step and everything could crack. "You seem distracted lately," he said one evening while I was loading the dishwasher. The way he watched me made my skin prickle. "Maybe you need more rest." "Just tired," I answered, arranging plates with careful precision. The routine tasks helped steady my hands. "You know how I get when the seasons change." He liked that answer. It fit his narrative of me being delicate, unstable. The smile he gave me was the kind you'd give a child who finally understood a simple lesson. Then came the announcement. We were having dinner, salmon, his favorite, which I'd started cooking more often to maintain the illusion. He reached across the table and took my hand, using that gentle tone that always preceded something calculated. "I've been thinking," he said, "about us, about making things right." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "What if we renewed our vows? A fresh start, just the 2 of us. The resort up at Lake Geneva." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Lake Geneva meant expensive. Lake Geneva meant public. Lake Geneva meant a performance. "When?" I managed to ask, proud of how steady my voice remained. He named the date, and my stomach dropped. The same weekend as the audit deadline. Of course it was. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. He wanted me locked into a romantic gesture, something visible and binding, before any questions could surface. I forced my face into what I hoped looked like pleasant surprise. "That sounds wonderful," I said, the lie tasting bitter. "It's just what we need." Later that night, I sat in Gloria's kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of that familiar chamomile. "He's planning something," I whispered. "The timing's too perfect." Gloria's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "He wants witnesses," she said. "Photos, social media posts, evidence of a happy marriage before the auditors start digging." She reached across and squeezed my arm. "Keep gathering everything you can, every receipt, every transfer. We've got 6 weeks. Make them count." That night, I lay beside Brian in our bed, listening to his steady breathing. The darkness felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. 6 weeks. Each day would bring new risks, new chances for him to notice something was off. I counted the weeks in my head, over and over, while sleep stayed stubbornly out of reach. Brian shifted beside me, mumbling something in his sleep. I went still, barely breathing, until his movements settled. Even unconscious, he had me monitoring my every move. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what he'd do if he caught even a hint of what I was documenting. The thought alone was enough to chase away any hope of rest. I carried fresh bank statements in my purse that morning, each page crisp with possibility. You know that feeling when puzzle pieces start clicking together? That's how it felt walking into Gloria's kitchen, where she'd cleared her usual crossword puzzles off the table to make room for our work. "Look at this," I said, spreading out the latest downloads. 3 more spa charges last month, all on company cards. Gloria adjusted her reading glasses and started sorting papers into neat piles. "He's not even trying to hide it anymore," she muttered, tapping account numbers into her ancient desktop computer. "Men like Brian, they get sloppy when they think they're untouchable." I watched her create folder after folder, each one labeled with dates and vendor names that would make an auditor's job almost too easy. The morning sun streamed through her lace curtains, catching dust motes that danced around us like confetti. Remember those old library card catalogs with their tiny wooden drawers? Gloria's filing system reminded me of that. Methodical, foolproof, permanent. "See here?" She pointed to her screen. When auditors review expenses, they look for patterns first. Brian's got himself a nice, neat pattern of Friday afternoon business meetings at that hotel spa. She made air quotes with her fingers, and I almost smiled. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking away from all this, clean, free, vindicated. But then Brian's smirk flashed through my mind, that look he'd given me when he announced the vow renewal. My jaw tightened. No, better to keep quiet and keep working. The afternoon wore on, Gloria's fingers click-clacking away at her keyboard. I was sorting receipts by date when I heard it. A high-pitched whine from her computer, like a kettle about to blow. "That's not right," Gloria muttered, frowning at her screen. The whining got louder, and then nothing. The screen went blue, not the familiar Windows blue screen of death. This was different. Flat. Empty. Dead. "No, no, no." Gloria's fingers flew across the keyboard, but nothing happened. She hit the power button. The screen flickered once and returned to that horrible blue void. My coffee cup slipped in my hands, splashing lukewarm liquid across the table. Heat rushed to my face as I watched Gloria attempt restart after restart. "The files," I whispered. "Tell me you backed them up somewhere." Her hands were shaking. I'd never seen Gloria's hands shake before. She'd been steady as a rock through her husband's death, through her daughter's divorce, through everything. But now, I thought, her voice cracked. The auto backup should have. She trailed off, staring at the lifeless monitor. The silence in her kitchen pressed against my ears like I was deep underwater. Weeks of work, every carefully organized folder, every screenshot, every transaction record, gone in less time than it takes to blink. I drove home in a daze that evening, my mind spinning through every file we'd saved, every folder we'd created. What was still out there? What could we recover? The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, but all I could see was that flat blue screen. My hands shook as I logged into my private cloud storage account that night, the one I'd been using as backup for the backup. But where rows of dated folders should have been, there was only white space. Empty, as if none of it had ever existed. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked refresh once, twice, 3 times. Nothing changed. The evidence we'd gathered had vanished like footprints in sand, leaving me right back where I started, alone with the truth, but no way to prove it. The morning after Gloria's computer crash hit like a digital bomb, I wandered through my kitchen feeling hollow. The coffee maker gurgled, but I barely heard it over Brian's voice playing on repeat in my head. "You wouldn't survive a day without me." Maybe he was right. What did I have left? A stack of vanished files and the bitter taste of failure in my mouth. You know that feeling when your whole world narrows down to just breathing? That's where I was, mechanically loading the dishwasher while my mind kept circling the drain. The plates clinked together too loudly in the morning quiet. Brian breezed in, all pressed suit and cologne, catching me lost in thought. "There's those insecurities again," he said, clicking his tongue like he was scolding a child. "You always get that look when you're overthinking things." He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the microwave door, not even bothering to look at me directly. The casual cruelty of it made my hands shake. I gripped the edge of the counter, wondering if this was what giving up felt like. Fighting Brian without evidence would be like walking into a gunfight armed with good intentions. Worse than useless. I grabbed my phone, desperate for any distraction from the spiral of defeat. Social media seemed safe enough. Other people's carefully curated happiness might at least numb the ache. That's when Kendra's post appeared in my feed, bright as a warning flare. The photo showed her lounging on a familiar wraparound porch, all sunshine and smugness, with that distinctive view of pine trees dipping toward blue water. My stomach lurched. I knew that railing, that exact angle. Brian had shown me the listing months ago, calling it an investment opportunity we shouldn't pass up. I zoomed in, fury replacing the fog of hopelessness. There she sat, champagne flute in hand, making herself at home in a space built from my 20 years of silent support. Every mortgage payment, every tax return I'd organized, every client dinner I'd hosted, all of it had helped construct the foundation she now treated as her playground. The rage cleared my head like smelling salts. I opened my email, scrolling back through months of correspondence Brian had carelessly shared with my account. He'd always assumed I was too busy with housework to actually read the business documents he forwarded. There, 3 months back, a property closing attachment he'd sent over with the casual note, "For our records." My hands trembled as I opened the PDF, but this time it wasn't from fear. The title document filled my screen, and there it was. My name, Claire Elizabeth Whitaker, listed as the legal owner of 487 Pine Lake Road. I stared at those pixels until they burned into my vision. One impossible question blazing brighter than Kendra's stolen sunshine. Why would Brian put the lake house in my name when he was using it to impress his mistress? That evening, I drove to Gloria's house with my heart hammering against my ribs. The property document felt like it was burning a hole through my purse. You ever hold a piece of paper that could change everything? That's what I had, maybe. Gloria's kitchen smelled like chamomile tea and sugar cookies, but I couldn't focus on the comfort of it. My hands shook as I spread the lake house title across her worn oak table. "I need to know if I'm seeing things," I said, tapping the signature line. "Tell me I'm not crazy." Gloria settled into her chair, reading glasses perched on her nose, and studied the document with the methodical patience of someone who'd spent decades untangling other people's financial knots. Her finger traced each line, each date, each official stamp. The tick of her wall clock seemed to get louder with each passing second. "Oh, honey," she finally said, looking up at me. "This isn't just your name on paper. This is the thread that unravels his whole sweater." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Brian put this property in your name, probably forged your signature to hide it from the tax assessors and shield his other assets." I sank into the chair opposite her, remembering all those times Brian had patronizingly told me to just sign here on documents I was too busy to read. The revelation hit me like a wave. He built his whole business using my identity as cover, didn't he? "That's exactly what he did," Gloria confirmed, her pencil scratching across the paper. "And he was counting on you never finding out, never questioning. But here's the beautiful thing. Legally speaking, you're the owner of record. That gives you standing." "Standing?" The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Legal, right to act," she explained. "Even if Brian tries to bully his way through this, ownership is ownership. The paper trail doesn't lie, and your name is all over it." The weight of it settled into my bones. All those years I thought I was just the reliable wife, the silent partner, the lucky one. And here I was, technically the legal owner of his house of cards. For the first time since finding that hotel receipt, I felt something like power uncurling in my chest. "We need to rebuild everything," I said, pulling out my laptop. "Fresh downloads, New screenshots, printed copies, backup after backup after backup. Gloria nodded approvingly. And this time, we store it all in multiple places. Cloud drives, email accounts, even good old-fashioned paper files. She patted my hand. No more single points of failure. We worked until my eyes burned, methodically downloading bank statements, property records, tax documents, anything that showed my name linked to Brian's business dealings. Gloria helped me organize it all into a clean, chronological packet that would make sense to the audit board. Every document cross-referenced, every transaction highlighted, every connection crystal clear. The vow renewal weekend, I said quietly, as we attached the final files to a draft email. That's when I'll send it, while he's standing there talking about fresh starts and second chances, thinking he's got me locked down tight. Gloria watched me schedule the email, her expression both proud and worried. Just remember, timing is everything. We need this to land when it'll do the most damage and give him the least time to react. Near midnight, I added the audit board's email addresses to the to field, double-checked every attachment, and saved the draft. My cursor hovered over the Send Later button for a long moment before I clicked it. The scheduled delivery was set, exactly when Brian would be raising a champagne glass to our renewed commitment. Back home, I packed my suitcase for the weekend trip with precise, measured movements. Sundress, sandals, swimsuit, all the props for Brian's performance of marital bliss. He watched from the doorway, smiling that satisfied smile of his. "This weekend is going to be perfect," he said, and for once I didn't have to fake my answering smile. Because he was right, it would be perfect, just not in the way he imagined. You know those moments when your whole life feels like you're watching someone else's movie? That's how I felt stepping into the Grand Vista Hotel that Friday evening. The lobby sparkled with that artificial perfection hotels love, all gleaming marble and crystal chandeliers trying too hard to impress, just like Brian. "There's my beautiful wife," Brian announced to the check-in clerk, his hand settling possessively on my lower back. The same hand that probably touched Kendra last week, I thought, but kept my face pleasant. The desk clerk beamed at us like we were some romantic comedy come to life. Remember when a touch from him used to make me feel safe instead of dirty? The memory hit me as we rode the elevator up, Brian surprising me with takeout Chinese after a long day, back when his smile reached his eyes. Now, everything was performance art. "The sunset view from our suite is spectacular," Brian was saying, playing tour guide. "Almost as spectacular as you'll look tomorrow when we renew our vows." His words dripped honey, but I could smell the artificial sweetener underneath. The evening reception started at 7. I wore the navy cocktail dress Brian had suggested, playing my part while my phone felt heavy in my clutch, that scheduled email waiting like a loaded gun. Brian worked the room like the businessman he was, dropping my name in all the right places. "Claire's been my rock for 20 years, he told some silver-haired couple. "The best thing that ever happened to me." I sipped my wine and thought about the lake house he'd stolen in my name. About Kendra. Right on cue, his phone lit up on the table, her name flashing like a neon sign. He flipped it over quickly, but not before I saw. The vow renewal wasn't about love or fresh starts. It was insurance against the truth. When Brian stood for his toast, everyone gathered around like moths to his flame. He'd always known how to command a room. "To new beginnings," he raised his champagne flute, looking straight at me. "And to the woman who makes everything possible." You have no idea how right you are, I thought, forcing a smile as the bubbles burned my throat. "Excuse me," I murmured a few minutes later, squeezing his arm like an adoring wife. "Just need to freshen up." The bathroom was empty, thank God. I locked myself in the last stall, hands shaking slightly as I pulled out my phone. The email was there, scheduled and waiting, loaded with every file that would expose his house of cards, each attachment renamed for clarity. Valentine's Day hotel receipt, lake house title, Claire's forged signature, company fund transfers to personal account. Through the door, I could hear Brian's laugh floating down the hallway. That confident sound that used to make me feel included, but now just reminded me of every lie. My thumb hovered over send. One tap, and there'd be no going back. The audit board would have everything by morning. I thought about the day I found that first receipt in his golf bag, about every time he'd used the word insecurities like a weapon, about Kendra posting photos from my lake house, about Gloria's steady voice saying, "He's hanging himself, honey." I pressed send. The whoosh sound felt louder than it was. I watched the progress bar tick to completion, and just like that, 20 years of marriage became a ticking bomb. The phone showed message sent with such simple finality it almost seemed anticlimactic. I took 3 deep breaths, checked my mascara, and smoothed my dress. Brian was still holding court when I returned to the ballroom, his arm opening to pull me close as if I belonged there. I smiled up at him, wondering which would arrive first with the morning sun, my freedom or his fury. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his public voice warm and concerned. "Perfect," I said. And for the first time in months, I wasn't completely lying. The morning sun streamed through the hotel curtains, but it wasn't the light that woke me. It was Brian's footsteps, sharp, erratic pacing that cut through the quiet like a saw blade. I kept my eyes closed at first, letting his mounting panic fill the room. His phone buzzed again and again, each vibration more urgent than the last. You know that moment when you're watching a bomb timer tick down in movies? This was better. This was real. Brian's voice cracked as he answered another call. "What do you mean frozen? No, that's impossible. Check again." A pause, then louder. "Well, unfreeze them." I sat up slowly, playing the concerned wife. "Honey, what's wrong?" He didn't answer, just jabbed at his phone screen with trembling fingers. I watched over his shoulder as he opened the banking app, the one I'd helped him set up years ago. Red text flashed across each account, temporarily restricted. The numbers that had made him feel powerful were suddenly just pixels he couldn't touch. "It's a mistake," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Just a system glitch. They'll fix it." But his face had gone the color of old paste, and sweat beaded along his hairline. When the third attempt to transfer funds failed, something snapped. He hurled the phone across the room, where it bounced off an armchair with a dull thud. "God damn it!" The words exploded from him, and I flinched, not from fear, but from the effort of hiding my satisfaction. His empire was crumbling in real time, and I had a front row seat. His phone lit up again, this time with a partner's name. Brian grabbed it and hit speaker, probably too rattled to hold it properly. The voice that filled our room was familiar. Tom, the senior partner who'd always laughed at Brian's jokes. He wasn't laughing now. "What the hell is going on, Brian? The auditors just called an emergency meeting. They're talking about forged documents, hidden assets, misappropriated funds. Jesus Christ, they're saying half the Lake Ridge development is titled under your wife's name without her knowledge." I could actually see Brian's authority draining away like water circling a drain. "Tom, listen, I can explain..." "Explain what? How you used company money to fund your affair? How you've been cooking the books since God knows when? The board wants immediate repayment of everything, Brian. Everything." My phone vibrated softly in my pocket, a text from Gloria. They received everything. The words sent a thunderclap through my chest, but I kept my face neutral. The evidence was speaking for itself now, each document a nail in the coffin Brian had built. I noticed Kendra's usual morning messages weren't lighting up his phone anymore. Funny how quickly rats abandon a sinking ship. We went down to breakfast because that's what you do. At these things, you keep up appearances. I watched Brian try to smile at other guests while his eyes darted around like a trapped animal's. His hands shook as he stirred his coffee. 3 more calls lit up his phone. He rejected them all. When I stood up to use the restroom, Brian followed. The hallway was empty, just me, him, and 20 years of lies catching up at once. His hand shot out, fingers digging into my wrist hard enough to leave marks. The mask of charm vanished, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "What did you do?" The words came out in a hiss, cold as cemetery frost. His grip tightened, and I could feel his pulse hammering through his fingers. The old me would have shrunk, apologized, tried to soothe his anger. But that version of Claire had died the moment I found that hotel receipt. I met his gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch between us like a tripwire, waiting to see if he'd stumble over the truth on his own. The drive home felt like crossing into a different country. Brian's hands strangled the steering wheel while his phone kept buzzing with messages he couldn't ignore anymore. You know that moment when you realize the ground stopped shaking after an earthquake? That's how I felt. Steady in a way I hadn't been in months. This is a mistake, Brian kept muttering. They can't do this. They can't just... His voice cracked as another email notification lit up his phone screen. I watched him swipe through message after message from the partners. The words immediate audit suspension and pending investigation flashed by. Each new alert seemed to chip away at that smirk he'd worn for so long. Remember how he used to lean back in his office chair, telling everyone how he'd built this from nothing? Now his shoulders curved forward, like he was trying to make himself smaller. It was a posture I knew well. He'd trained me to wear it for years. Your mail, I said quietly, holding out his phone when another batch of notifications came through. He snatched it, then froze. The blood drained from his face as he read whatever was on the screen. Kendra had posted again. I caught a glimpse as he scrolled. Distancing myself from recent events. Need to be clear about my non-involvement. The post went on, but Brian's hand was shaking too much to read more. She'd thrown him under the bus so fast the tires were still spinning. You ever watch someone's whole facade crack? It's like seeing a building implode. First the windows go dark, then the walls start to cave, and finally the whole thing just collapses. Brian grabbed his keys and mumbled something about the lake house. I followed in my car, keeping 3 vehicles between us. The same road we'd driven countless times felt different now. Every mile marker was a countdown to something inevitable. When we pulled up to the house, that gorgeous lake view he'd given me without my knowledge, Brian fumbled with the door code. It didn't work. He tried again. Nothing. What the hell? He spun toward me. What did you do to the codes? I held up the property documents. Nothing. Just exercising my rights as the legal owner. Have you ever seen someone's ego deflate in real time? His face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on something between disbelief and defeat. The great Brian Whitaker, standing there like a kid caught in a lie. He shouldered past me into the house. I'd left that door unlocked and headed straight for the master bedroom, the closet where he kept his precious suits. My nose caught that same cologne from the golf bag, but it smelled sour now. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him grab at hangers. There's a box in the garage, I said. The kind they use for office paper. Thought you might need it. He found the box where I'd left it. One by one, those expensive suits went in, folded about as neatly as you'd expect from someone whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. Each one represented a dinner with Kendra. A lie told across our kitchen table. A moment he'd thought himself untouchable. You really planned this, he said, cramming another shirt into the box. All of it. While I was... He couldn't finish the sentence. While you were what, Brian? Lucky to have me? He flinched at his own words thrown back at him. The sun was setting over the lake, painting everything in that golden light that used to make this place feel magical. Now it just highlighted every crack in his carefully constructed world. I stood there with the house keys pressing into my palm, watching him pack up the last pieces of his empire into a cardboard box meant for paper, the same kind of box I used to unpack for him when he was building something great. The irony wasn't lost on me. The question sat heavy in my chest. Should I leave now, while he was distracted with his own implosion? Or stay and watch him walk out that door instead?